What unusual, but here we are, the 1st of January, and it's Sunday. Our text today, kind of a not one of those like those uplifting texts. The lectionary gives us this text today, and so it's kind of one of those somber ones from the gospel. But we're gonna address it anyway, and find what we need to find in here, because New Year's resolutions and thinking back, reflecting on the past, and thinking about our present and maybe our future requires that we take honest looks at who we are, where we've been, all the places we've been, where we are now, and where our direction is heading into the future. So let's look at Matthew 20, verse 13 through 20. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother," the angel said. "Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." That night Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary his mother, and they stayed there until Herod's death. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, "I called my son out of Egypt." Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's reports of the star's first appearance. Herod's brutal action fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A cry was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they are dead. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. "Get up," the angel said. "Take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead." So, yes, we are indeed celebrating our new year, a new year of possibilities in our world and in our lives. But today, January 1st, is not a happy anniversary day at all. You see, January 1st, 1923, something happened in America that wasn't a great thing at all. 100 years ago today, a cry was heard in a town called Rosewood, weeping and great mourning. Of course, I'm not talking about Rosewood in Bethlehem or near Israel. I'm talking about Rosewood, Florida. 100 years ago today in Rosewood, Florida, it's the day that the Rosewood massacre began. It might not be something you're very familiar with in American history. Sometimes these things, we like to, sweep some things under the carpet sometimes and focus on more of the happy stuff. But as a citizens of a nation, we have to look at it all, the good and the bad, and have an honest evaluation of where we've been, and it helps us to understand where we need to be now and where we need to go. Well, Rosewood, Florida was a quiet, mostly African-American town. And according to the history website, it was originally settled by both black and white people. And the main industry in Rosewood was the production of, yes, pencils. So they made pencils in Rosewood, Florida, and this was a thriving pencil manufacturing community, believe it or not. But when the cedar tree population declined and things started to get tough, most of the white people moved to the nearby town of Sumner. And by the 1920s, the Rosewood population was about 200 blacks in that town, plus one white family that ran the general store. Well, on January 1st, 1923, exactly 100 years ago today, a young white woman in Sumner, Florida, Fannie Taylor, was found covered in bruises. She claimed that a black man had assaulted her. Her husband, who was a foreman at the local mill, gathered a mob of white citizens to hunt down this assailant, bring this guy to justice. He also called for help from the neighboring communities around and reached out to the infamous Ku Klux Klan. About 500 members, according to the site, came and helped the effort. Well, the white mobs searched the woods for any black man they could find. Law enforcement actually they determined that a black prisoner named Jesse Hunter had escaped from a chain gang right around that time, and they immediately made him a suspect. Because, why not? Well, the mobs focused their searches on this Hunter dude and went after black families that they believed were hiding this individual. In Rosewood, the town itself, one mob pulled a black man out of his house, tied him to a car, dragged him to Sumner behind the car, and beat him. Another mob tortured a blacksmith until he took them to the spot where Hunter was said to be hiding. When Hunter was not found, they shot the blacksmith and hung him in a tree. On the night of January the 4th, 4 days from now, a mob of armed white men surrounded a house in which 25 people were hiding, mostly children. Shots were fired back and forth. A black woman and her son were killed. 2 white attackers were also killed. The gun battle lasted overnight and ended when the whites broke down the door and the black children escaped, thankfully, into the woods. Newspapers falsely reported that bands of armed black citizens were going on a rampage. White attackers burned down the churches of Rosewood and then went after people in houses. Dozens died, both blacks and whites. And by January 7th, about a week later, most of the town was burned to the ground, and the fleeing black citizens never returned. As for Fannie Taylor, the young white woman, unknown what really happened to her, some survivors believe that her bruises were inflicted by a white lover. And Jesse Hunter, the escapee from the chain gang, he was never found. It reminds us that the history of any nation, even a nation as great as America, and to reiterate, I love America. I think America is the greatest nation on earth in so many ways and for so many reasons. But even the history of such a great nation as ours can be filled with great triumphs. Yes, we have had great triumphs in America, but we've also had the worst of the worst happen here. America is no exception because most nations have such highs and lows in their history. From the Declaration of Independence and the Emancipation Proclamation, those great high moments in our nation and so many others, to moments like Wounded Knee or Sand Creek or the Tulsa race riot. We have a extreme of good and bad all happening within our past. Israel is no exception to what I'm talking about here. From the glories of the temple restoration in Israel after the return from the exile in Babylon to the lows of moments like our Bible story today. History tends to repeat itself over and over again, no matter what nation or generation we're talking about. It just has always been the same. Those things happen over and over again. And in both ancient Israel and in modern America, we know the devastating impact of violence, and especially violence when it comes to vulnerable children and adults. And in our text today that we read from the Bible, King Herod, what was he doing? What was he thinking? How could he perform such an atrocity in the history of the Israelites? How could he do this? Well, probably the reason why Herod did what he did was that King Herod was feeling very threatened by the birth of this baby Jesus. Why would he feel threatened by this? Because the birth of Christ was an identification of the King of the Jews, and he was the king. No other king was going to come into his kingdom, no matter what way, shape, form, or how, and take over his spot that he had, and he certainly felt threatened. He didn't want any competition in his world and in his leadership and his power, and certainly not from a child who had no political or military power at his disposal. This was going to be an easy thing to squish right away before it ever has a chance to come to fruition. So feeling frightened and infuriated, he ordered a search and destroy mission to be carried out in all of Bethlehem. A horrible, horrible thing. Unfortunately, the feelings that drove Herod to violence are still alive and well in our world today. Humans are still humans. We just don't seem to change. And likely, we're going to have to deal with this fact in humanity for years and years to come. Back to the town of Rosewood. According to The Guardian, Rosewood was a prosperous black town in 1923. 100 years ago. Even though the pencil industry was gone, they found a way to make things work. And it was, like I said, mostly black residents there. They had their own baseball team. They had a Masonic temple and a few hundred residents. A black survivor of the massacre says that the whites were disturbed, he said, because they looked at Rosewood and saw a bunch of black folks living better than the white folks. This was his opinion. And they were fearing that the minority, perhaps, will take over the majority, kind of like King Herod, fearing that the little baby Jesus was going to take over his significant power. As irrational as that fear is real. And that fear is repeated over and over in the history of humanity. It's strangely, and I certainly do teach racism when I teach ethics up at the college. And part of the teaching of racism involves looking at white supremacist groups because, yes, they are very alive today in our societies, in America and other white societies around the world. White supremacy is still strong. It really is. And interesting enough, when you study white supremacist groups, you see a common thread in their beliefs and in their messages that they're sending to the world. And of course, the common thread is that white people are superior and all others are inferior and should not be regarded as superior like the whites are. But another common thread that the white supremacists have in their belief system and in their driving force behind what they do is they have this feeling and this message, and their message is, you will not overtake us. That's their message. You can see it on their signs. You can hear it in their rhetoric. They have this genuine, honest fear that whites are going to be overtaken by minorities. A genuine fear. You will not overtake us, they say. You say, overtake us? Yeah. White supremacists are afraid of being overtaken by minorities. And then, probably this is what they fear. They probably fear that when they are overtaken, when the whites are overtaken by minorities, what will the minorities do to us as white people? After all we've done in the past, what are they going to do to us? After all the years of oppression that those in power have inflicted, what will happen? It's a fearful thought for those who are desperate to remain on top, as King Herod was desperate to remain on top. He was a desperate person, and like many world leaders in ancient times, and also our own day, he felt threatened by any challenge, and he acted out of fear. He feared losing power and control from a baby born in a manger. But he heard the prophets. He heard the wise men and what they said. And what they said rang true in his head. Whoa, this could be big. And this could spell my end, my demise. You will not overtake us, King Herod said. God or Jesus or whoever this new king of the Jews is, you will not overtake us. And he said that, and then he performed his fateful action in verse 16. He's furious when he realized the wise men had outwitted him, and he sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem, 2 years old and under, based on the wise men reports of the star's first appearance, which was obviously 2 years earlier. Well, such fear and resentment, as we see in our Bible text today, can lead to violence both then, in those days, and also now. From Bethlehem to Rosewood, to Auschwitz, and to the Ukraine even today. bloody story remains the same. Herod had a once-in-a-lifetime chance. As the king in that area, he had a once-in-a-lifetime chance to welcome the baby Jesus, one and only Son of God. But that was way too threatening of a prospect for him. Way too threatening. This town ain't big enough for the both of us, you know. John Wayne's statement or something like that from the glorified tales of the American West. Well, the town wasn't big enough, apparently, for Herod and Jesus. And so, verse 18, the cry was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they are dead. Herod resorted to violence because he didn't see Jesus as a gift from God. Instead, he saw him as a threat. The story never seems to end. Like I said, Ukraine, Putin perhaps feels threatened by the West, as it's been mentioned on many occasions. So he acts out of a fear of being taken over. Republicans feel threatened by Democrats, and Democrats feel threatened by Republicans. Whites feel threatened by blacks, and probably blacks feel threatened by whites. Over and over again. But what if it were different? What if it were different than that? What if we could see each other as a gift? A gift, and not a threat. What if we could see our differences as potentials and possibilities, not problems or perils, not threats at all, but gifts? As followers of Jesus, we are challenged to see our neighbors as gifts and not threats. Author and pastor John Pavlitz, he said, when you meet another person, anybody, when you meet any other person out there, he said, you are coming face to face with a once-in-history, never-to-be-repeated reflection of the image of God. And everyone is different and unique in that reflection. No two people in this world will ever be the same. Once in history. Each individual out there. And he goes on to say, each one is created in the image of God, and each one is made of God's stuff. I like that. God's stuff. Everyone is made of God's stuff. No matter who they are, or what color they are, or what they have done or not done. He says, every single day you encounter thousands of breathing, animated thumbnails of the divine. Every person you meet is God's stuff. Doesn't matter where they were born, or whether they're young, or old, or red, or blue, or what they are. They're all God's stuff. They're gifts, not threats. Worthy of respect and not hostility. And what a difference this makes. From Bethlehem all the way to Rosewood, all the way to our current situation now. And it's a tough one. We have some tough things going on right now. We have a situation on our southern border. People from other nations are amassing, as you know, I'm sure, in record numbers, all trying to get across the border into America to apply for asylum, refuge. Recent federal report says there are well over 1 million people already in the United States seeking asylum, with many, many more at the border, hoping and waiting to get in. Countless more, we don't know, are sneaking in, crossing illegally into our nation. And they're straining our systems down there that deal with such things. They're straining it to the breaking point. Many in the land of the free and the home of the brave don't know what to think about this. If you're like me, you scratch your head and say, wow, that problem is way above my pay grade. And it is. As any individual cannot solve that problem that we have down there. You look at the world that we live in today, here's another problem above my pay grade. The disparity between rich and poor is ever growing. The richer are getting far, far richer. And I read a report a while back, and I think I mentioned this not too long ago, The richest 20 people or so in the world own as much in assets and finances as the total bottom half of the entire global population. So like, almost 4 billion people on Earth own as much as the richest 20 people in the world. Boy, is that a lopsided situation we're living in today. And we as Americans, as citizens of the wealthiest nation, or one of the wealthiest nations on Earth, we often feel threatened by the influx of immigrants and refugees and foreigners into our land. We fear that they are going to drain our resources, take our jobs, increase our crime, generally degrade our neighborhoods, and we feel, yes, threatened by them. That same feeling again, coming up again within human history. Those people who are in charge are feeling threatened by those who are coming on as new people in the system. We see them, these immigrants, certainly as a burden and not a gift. And I get it. We just can't open up our borders. It just wouldn't work. If we opened up our southern borders, it would be absolute chaos. It would be insane how many people would come across. And it would overwhelm so many cities down there. And even as it would go north, it would overwhelm our systems that we have. And it would be detrimental to everybody involved. But still, what do we do with this problem? What do we do with this situation? What do we do? It's, again, too large of a problem for most of us to even comprehend, let alone decide on some sort of a remedy. Well, noted and often hated modern-day philosopher Pete Singer, he's well known for his drowning child thought experiment. The drowning child thought experiment, which goes something like this, and there's many variations to this. But here's one of the variations to his drowning child thought experiment, and we'll do the thought experiment on you all. Ready for this thought experiment? Turn on your brains, and we will have an experiment here. Suppose you just bought an expensive pair of white shoes. Really expensive. You have been wanting these shoes and saving up your nickels and dimes, and you got your shoes. And you're out walking with them, and you walk with them next to a large mud puddle. And you see a child struggling and drowning in that puddle. And you think, do I run in and save the child in the puddle, therefore ruining my brand new white expensive shoes that I have wanted for so long and have suffered for so long without them? Do I ruin them in a moment's time on the first day I wear them to save this child? And again, I ask this question always in my ethics class, and all the students readily say, yes, of course. You go in that puddle. Who cares about your shoes? They're just shoes, and this is a drowning child we're talking about. It's a no-brainer. Save the child, because the child is worth infinitely more than a pair of shoes, even really nice, expensive ones. But here's the glitch in that logic. Here's the catch in this thought experiment. You see, in our globalized, hyper-connected world that we're living in, we are effectively seeing mud puddles everywhere. They're very easy to see around our world from our vantage point. Our world is very small these days. And as Americans, as a nation, we walk past many mud puddles out there with children in them that are drowning and dying. We do this all the time as a nation living in this modern world that we are living in. We can easily see the destitute lives of people in so many nations. We can see their needs and their sufferings very, very clearly. Yet we often walk right past. We walk right past because, to be honest, many times we are much more interested in our new white shoes, keeping them beautifully nice. We're very proud of them. What is the meaning of this thought experiment? The meaning is simple, is that we don't want to give up our ultra-high standard of living to significantly improve the lives of those who are on the brink of survival. We just don't want to give it up. We don't want to do that. Don't get me wrong. America is a very generous nation. If you look at the numbers, we're extremely generous. Not only is our government generous in helping situations around the world, but as individuals, Americans give a lot of money, freely give a lot of money to charities and humanitarian efforts out there. But the disparity between our average life conditions here in America and those of, say, the average life conditions of someone living in Honduras is astronomical. There's a big, big difference. The truth is that the wealthy of the world could eradicate poverty and destitution, and we can clearly see such things all around the world that we're living in, but we are unwilling to ruin our new shoes in order to make that difference. And yes, it is a very complex problem, and there is no simple answer to this. And I'm not saying that we can just throw a bunch of money out there and fix all the problems of the world. We've tried to do that over and over again, and oftentimes the money just creates more problems. But yet still, even with that challenge and with that frustration, children are still in mud puddles around the world. And we can't throw our hands up and say, well, forget it, I'm just going to focus on my new pair of shoes and be happy with my life that I'm living right now, while those poor, unfortunate little children in those mud puddles are suffering. Yeah, I mean, we could try to live such a life with blinders on and not look around us, but I don't think Jesus would have lived life that way. I don't think Jesus wants to live life that way right now, because you know what? The hands and feet of Jesus, yeah, look at them right here. Hold your hands up. These are Jesus' hands. Do you think what does Jesus want to use these for? Based on the gospel stories of Jesus and what we know of Jesus, what does he want to do with these things? Pick out brand new pairs of white shoes. Jesus is interested in brand new pairs of white shoes? No. Well, you've got to have your work boots, Roy, but Jesus is interested. How do you make a difference? Do whatever you can. We're all only individuals in a world with billions and billions of people in it, and more problems that we could even possibly write down in books all across the earth. But if we walk by the puddle and do not help the drowning child, I'd like to say that we're probably no better than Herod. Thinking about ourselves, thinking about our own situations. Parents still weep and mourn the same way they did back then for their children now when they are actively oppressed. Parents still weep and mourn. And rather than saying, bah humbug, like, good old Mr. Scrooge, perhaps we should be asking the spirit of Christmas future to give us another chance. To give us another chance to make a difference. A chance to see all people as gifts. And once we see people in that way, we're challenged to take action and to protect the most vulnerable people around us. It could be special need adults or low-income neighbors or recent immigrants just down in Concord, political refugees or members of a minority group or even neighborhood children. Even in Rosewood, 100 years ago today, some of the heroes of Rosewood were a person named John Wright, the white owner of that general store. Yeah, you know what he did? He took as many blacks as he could and he hid them in his home during the massacre. He was putting himself and his family at great risk. But he's not going to stand by and watch a drowning child in a mud puddle. Walk by because, well, I'm white. I guess they're not going to come after me. I can just scoot right out of here and be safe. How about two wealthy white brothers, John and William Bryce? They heard about the violence and they sent a train to rescue black women and children. And of course, the many, many brave black women and men, including someone named Sylvester Carrier, protected their own children. He was a survivor of the massacre. The survivor of the massacre was a young girl, and at that time she said that cousin Sylvester snatched me up and protected me. He said, "Come, let me save you." And he did. He preserved her life. So when we, in our world today, when we hear weeping and great mourning of mothers weeping for their children, it happens today, just like it did then, we are challenged to respond with compassion and with care. Can't cover our eyes and ignore the violence being done around us or the many problems that are out there. From Bethlehem to Rosewood, from ancient Israel to 21st century America, we need to identify with victims of poverty and racism and discrimination and violence and take action to protect the innocent and the most vulnerable people around us. Hey, didn't Joseph do this when he took Jesus and scurried off to Egypt? He did what he had to do. And John Wright did this when he took the black residents of Rosewood into his home, and Sylvester Carrier did this when he defended his family. Yes, today is not a happy 100-year anniversary in the history of America, but maybe today could be the first day of the next 100 years of caring for people in a new way. Can we